Part 2, we're back, of course, talking FF7. We're talking some Rebirth and maybe Part 3. I don't really know. We're looking at that Qiddiya gaming panel for FF7 Rebirth, summoning the masterpiece. Now, we did talk about a good chunk of stuff from this the other day. It's mostly just like people tweeting out information that came from the panel, and it's pretty much Part 3 focused. I'm not sure if there's any other like Part 3 related information from this. I feel like if there was, that would have been the information people try to put out there, of course, because everybody's looking forward to the third game. But that means that like a majority of this panel should be stuff that we've not talked about yet, of course, because I've only ever seen Part 3 stuff from the panel, so I don't know what else was discussed at all from this. And of course, I'm going into it relatively blind. I did kind of skim through both VODs, the one that's on the Qiddiya Gaming Twitch, and then what's on, I think, the Square Enix YouTube channel, because they're different times. The one's like 2.5 hours, the other one's just a little under 2 hours. The Qiddiya Gaming VOD, the first like 30 to 40 minutes is just like them waiting for it to start, like the starting soon, the countdown, all that other shit. So like the majority of that doesn't even matter. So the relatively similar links in video for the most part. All that's on the Square Enix channel is like an hour and 54 minutes, but the first like 6 to 7 minutes is just like the starting soon shit. Again, as always with these kinds of videos, I have no idea what's worth talking about from this. You know, it's, you know, roughly 2 hour panel, but I mean, it might be a 10-minute video, 15-minute video, 20-minute video. I don't know. We'll see. Let's hop into it. So the panel opens up with them introducing Kitase and Hamaguchi, no surprises there, and also the interpreter for the evening, Gavin Poffley. We'll say too right before we like fully hop into it, the audio so far is very low, to the point that I might need to put on headphones to even listen to it or hear it. I don't think it's better or louder as it goes on, but it's just pretty quiet here at the beginning. So they do start off the panel by saying that the kind of focus of the presentation is synergy, and they want to talk about the past, present, and future when it comes to FF7. And I suppose maybe that's why we got so much like Part 3 information from this, since it is kind of going to be talking about the future.
So now we're going to talk about the past, the present, and the future of Final Fantasy VII. So let's see what Final Fantasy VII was like then, what it is now, and where we're going into the beyond.
So they first talk about FF7, of course, because they're talking about the past, and Kitase talks for several minutes kind of about, you know, technology back in the day and the movement to kind of like 3D sprites and things like that. The N64, Mario 64. I don't know why the fucking shit just blurred like that. That's insane. But it's all stuff we've heard before, right? It's nothing that is really new information in regards to the original FF7. Also talks about how he had his kid like right before they sent out like the master copy of FF7, which we've heard before in some sort of, I don't remember, presentation, interview, something like that, where he kind of correlates like the anniversary of FF7 to like the birth of his child or vice versa. But then Hamaguchi talks about FF7 for him back in the day, and of course he was, you know, a teenager at that time. He's in middle school, about to go to high school around the time that FF7 comes out. And that's what I like about him being a director, because he's somebody that grew up a fan of FF7, right? He was playing this shit as, you know, a teenager. He's a little bit older than I am. You know, I was in like elementary school around the time that FF7 came out. He's in like middle school going to high school. I don't know his exact age. I've tried to look it up before. I don't know if we know that anymore. I'm sure the information's out there somewhere. He looks young-ish, though. But that's why I like him as a director, because he's coming from the perspective of somebody that's like a lifelong fan. He's obviously been working for Square Enix for like 20 or so years at this point or some shit. But, you know, he grew up a fan of FF7, so him being a director was like a fantastic choice.
So back in 1997, I was in my third year of middle school, and I was just coming up to take my entry exams to get into high school. And I remember very well that my final exams to get into high school were really close to the release of Final Fantasy VII. So I could still picture that, you know, myself running quickly away from my final exam, rush home to play Final Fantasy VII.
Well, I can't necessarily relate to his experience because I was a little bit younger at the time. I do have memories of being in school, like, just wanting to get the shit over with. I just want to get home and play Final Fantasy. Not just necessarily 7, even though 7 is my favorite. I was playing like 7, 8, and 10 sort of around the same time. So Hamaguchi goes on to mention like what was like the standout moment for him back in the day for the game, and he does mention Aerith's death, which I understand. Just for me, I guess, it didn't like hit me that hard as a kid. For when I was younger, so like, you know, the emotional, powerful moments are just not going to hit that much because I'm just like a kid playing the game. Like, oh, Cloud looks cool. That sword's really big. His hair is spiky. Like, that's all I give a shit about. It did impact me to a certain degree because it is a member of the party, and I wasn't expecting her to die. But as I said before countless times on the channel, like, my party was almost always dudes. So I didn't really use Aerith that much outside of the forced moments where you got to use her. That's really just like in Midgar, right? It's mostly just Cloud, Barret, Red 13. Also, even as a kid with like dialogue options and shit, I've always gravitated towards Tifa, because that, even as a kid, I could see like this relationship makes the most sense out of the two. But also, having played the game at least one time back then, on subsequent playthroughs, I know that Aerith is going to die, so I just have like less attachment to the character, if that makes any sense. And that's my kid perspective on it. It's a little different now.
They always ask me, when I first played Final Fantasy VII, all those years ago, what was the biggest memory, the most important impression it left on me? When you lose Aerith.
I try to put myself back in like my younger shoes and try to remember what like stood out to me the most from FF7. I really don't know. Like, I don't know if any particular moment stood out to me so much, like, you know, the death of Aerith or anything like that. I know I've always been infatuated with the dying segment. I don't know that was always like my favorite moment from the game, but it's just like the scenery of like the cross in the background and the one-on-one fight with Dyne, and obviously him throwing himself off the cliff. Like it stuck with me for a very long time, for the majority of the time that I've been a fan of FF7. But I never really remember when I first started playing FF7, but given I was probably pretty young at the time, it was more than likely the first time I'd ever seen a character kill themselves in any sort of media. Like and again, I probably didn't even fully like comprehend everything about that scene, but I knew that Dyne killed himself. Looking back on it, I think Red 13 was kind of a big reason why I liked FF7 back in the day, because I'd played other RPGs around that time, but none of them had non-human companions. And I think that's something about FF7 that captivated me, because when you leave Midgar, right, you have like the whole team, but it's all humans and then one fucking animal. And I'm like, that's cool shit. I want to use that on my party. You don't talk about like Red 13 a lot on the channel, and even Vincent, but growing up, dude, both of those characters were big reasons why I kept replaying the game. Anyways, they move forward to the now for FF7, and they're obviously talking about, the remake project a bit, and Kitase talks about how, like, you can go back to, like, older books and older movies, and they hold up, and it's not necessarily the same with video games, and I gotta disagree, because he's obviously talking about, OG FF7 versus, the remake project, but, like, dude, I have watched people play FF7 for the first time, Let's Plays, reaction videos, whatever, that are still impacted fucking heavily by the story that's in the original FF7, whether they're crying at Aerith's death, the reveal of like what actually happened with Cloud, so on and so forth, right? Like I don't think that holds true for a lot of older games. It depends on which game you're talking about, I'm sure, but FF7's story and presentation still holds up fantastically almost 30 years later. I'm talking about people like my age, people that are older than me. I've seen people that are younger than me, people that were born after the original FF7 came out, that grew up in like the PS2 era, maybe even like the PS3 360 era, that have retroactively gone back to FF7 and been impacted by it.
I think in terms of other kinds of entertainment media, if you look at film, if you look at novels, you still can go back and see the classics, read the classics today. And they really don't lose anything over time. But it really isn't the same for video games, because old school game design can feel frustrating. It can be really annoying for people who use the modern games. And even on top of that, a lot of the hardware that all the games were available on is just no longer around anymore, so you can't play them in the first place.
And the last bit doesn't really make a lot of sense, because he might be talking sort of in general, just older games. You can't really play them so much anymore, but we're clearly talking about FF7 here with this panel, and FF7 is on every possible fucking platform. I'm just going to throw this in here too, because it keeps happening. It's just a little bit annoying and kind of distracting. Every so often, like they're shooting like the guys on stage talking, and then it'll like cut to like a picture of like the key art. It's kind of animated or whatever. But when it does that, almost every single time it cuts out a bit of audio, so I don't know what they're saying in certain parts.
And it really was because of that collaboration between those two types of development today, which is something that can appeal to both fans of the old original Final Fantasy VII and also complete newcomers as well. But we really did want to add new, different elements as well, so they would have an exciting and fresh experience.
Look at the moment right there. He's in the middle of like translating what Kitase had previously said, and in the middle of him talking, they transition, and then it cuts out the audio, and it picks up with Hamaguchi in the middle of talking onto the next subject. So I don't even fully know what he said there in that moment. I don't know why they keep doing that, though. Like, why do they keep transitioning? You can leave the camera literally just one shot, never even switch cameras, just looking at the stage and them talking the entire time. We don't need all these, like, fancy editing and stuff, man. It's just ruining the presentation. So next up, they talk about Aerith's death a bit and how it was portrayed in the original game and how they're trying to do it differently when it comes to Rebirth. And they do specifically say how they wanted to go the angle of, like, Cloud not letting go of his feelings for those that he loved and lost. And I thought that was kind of interesting just because there's people that are, kind of in denial on Aerith dying. And you're hearing this outright from Kitase himself, that Cloud doesn't want to accept her death.
This is a really tough question for us to ask ourselves. How do we show the most famous, the most shocking scene from Final Fantasy VII, which is what happened in the Forgotten Capital when you lose Aerith? How do we recreate that in a modern way? So what we want to show with that in the first Final Fantasy VII, the original game, was that feeling of loss and grief when you suddenly lose someone dear to you. We changed how that was depicted and approached in the remake series, though. Rather than focusing completely on that idea of loss and grief, we kind of changed the angle and looked at how Cloud really couldn't let his feelings go towards people he loved and lost.
To be honest, like, conceptually, I don't even dislike the idea of them going to a slightly different angle of maybe wanting Cloud not to accept her death, as opposed to the original game where it's very clear that she died. Like, that can sort of work, but I think the problem with the ending, at least for me, and maybe some other people out there, is they didn't focus enough on her death, and because they were doing the transition of like her dead and then her talking to Cloud and so on and so forth, it caused people to not really understand the ending and think that she might actually be alive. But again, as we just seen, they confirmed that she is dead.
But fortunately, we had a really great idea from our creative director, Qiddiya. He had a really good idea about how to show that idea of the human reaction to life and death. And his idea was put so well, translated so well into an active scene in the game by our team in charge, by our team in charge of cutscenes. So the team that we made for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and it's one of the last teams in the game, it changed somewhat in the way that people react to it from the same team in the original. And people can see it and interpret it in different ways. Everyone will come away with a slightly different idea of what went on.
And to be honest, the editing towards the ending is pretty cool with the way they do transition between, you know, the blood on the ground and the blood on the sword and like it not being there and stuff like that. It's kind of cool, but it's confusing to me, like how I guess the plan going forward is like Cloud doesn't realize she's dead or doesn't want to accept her death, whatever is going on there. But like, is the group never going to talk about it in the third game? Are we not going to like immediately pick up with the third game of them, you know, reminiscing on Aerith and like her fucking death and shit? How's that going to work if Cloud is thinking she's alive or not wanting to accept her death? And people are like, wow, I can't believe Sephiroth stabbed the shit out of Aerith. And Cloud's like, what? What do you mean? I thought she was over here talking the whole time. I guess it's where it kind of falls apart for me with this idea of Cloud not accepting her death, because I'm like, what is the plan going forward exactly? Like, how much of the game is he going to be like in denial of her death? It just kind of weird. Then we get to the Beyond section. We're talking about the future and talking about Part 3 and shit, and there's not really anything to discuss from this so much. I mean, we talked about some of it the other day, but it's really just like, we're taking the feedback from the first game and the second game. We're going to make the best game possible. It's kind of like, just like marketing, right? The third game is going to be the best game in the trilogy, and I hope it is, and I'm sure it probably will be, but, you know, it's just the kind of shit that you expect them to say. I'll say that we did look at the quote from Hamaguchi the other day about, you know, the game beating all expectations and being one of the best games of all time.
So the development team is hard at work as we speak, and we're going to make the game something that even beats any expectations that you have towards the game. I'm absolutely confident that the third game in the Final Fantasy VII Remake series will be one of the most loved, most popular games in the whole history of video games, once again.
We didn't really put a lot of emphasis on that last part the other day when we talked about it, but it is a bold claim. I think it's possible, because I do think, you know, Rebirth is like a major step up from what Remake was in terms of just like gameplay and stuff and enjoyment when playing the game. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with Remake, it's just a much better, more fun game to play, I would say. And as long as they can just exceed that, do that even more with the third game, right? Make a game that's even better than Rebirth, it's possible, but you're talking about the entire history of games. There's a lot of great games out there. So we're kind of coming up close to like the halfway point of the video, and there's just not like a ton to talk about. They did a big section on like where they're talking about characters, and they talked about Sephiroth for a long time. There's just nothing to really discuss there. I mean, they bring up like the little factoid of, in the original game, he's based more on Jaws, so it's like this thing you hear about, but you don't really see too much, and where they changed that, of course, with the Remake project. And now we're moving on to the other characters, and Kitase does say that his favorite like interactions are with Barret and Aerith, and he even says, even though there's like not a ton of those scenes when it comes to Rebirth, that's still like his favorite duo, I guess. I really don't know who like my actual favorite is. If I'm being a bit biased, it'd be Zack and Marlene, Zack and Biggs, combination of all those. Like, that's my favorite shit sometimes in the game, because we already know what's happening, like the FF7 story, right? There's some good shit there, obviously, with the Rebirth main party, but the Zack shit, whatever his fate is still new shit and is exciting. Like, when we cut away to Zack every time, even though he's my favorite character, that's still like the brand new stuff. I'm interested in what's going on there. It's just kind of exciting to see characters who never got to interact, really, right? We're having, you know, Zack talking to Marlene, Barrett's daughter, talking to Biggs, you know, who's somebody that's very important to the main party, of course. But also, I want that for, like, other characters, too. Not just Zack, but, you know, Zack interacting with the rest of the main party would be pretty fucking cool, because we never got to see that. But just in general, from the Remake project, I want interactions between characters that have never got to actually talk. Hamaguchi goes on to say that he really likes the dynamic between like Barret and Red 13, which I definitely prefer that more so than the Barret and Aerith stuff. Not that that's necessarily bad, it's just I like that dynamic more because it's kind of funny, but there's also some heartfelt moments. And he also brings up that like the solo moments between the two, like in Mythril Mine and like Cave of the Gi, weren't initially there, and actually had like Kazushika Nojima write that into the game, which I really appreciate.
So I actually really like the way that Barret interacts with Red 13. I mean, when the two of them together, they often bicker, they often banter with each other, and they look like they're insulting each other, but there really is that strong trust between them. In the scenes where you see Barret and Red 13, just the two of them fighting together, you see this in places like the Mithril Mine, and also later on in the Cave of the Gi. And these scenes actually weren't in the original draft of the script we got from our scenario writer, Mr. Hamaguchi. But we really wanted these kind of scenes in there, so we very much asked Mr. Nojima if he could write them in afterwards. We didn't just want them to relate to each other in the rest of the story when everyone's around. We wanted these moments when it's just the two of them together. They could talk directly to each other, they could fight together, and we could see more about their blooming relationship.
I think it's a pretty smart choice too, because the dynamic at the end of Remake was pretty funny. Whenever Red 13 kind of joins up with the party, right? When he goes like high five Red 13, he smacks him with the flame tail when they're in the back of the truck, and he refers to Barrett as like a 300-pound sack of shit or whatever. Like their dynamic's pretty good. So I think like having like a bromance between those two is really good in Rebirth.
What? Shit! What the hell, Red?
We move forward to talk about synergy attacks a bit, and Hamaguchi says that his favorite was like a Red 13 Kate Sith one, where like Red 13 does a bunch of attacks and he falls down and like Kate Sith catches him, the Fat Moogle catches him rather. I don't know what my favorite is necessarily. I don't know what the name is right now. Obviously, I could look it up, but it's my main party on my initial playthrough was Cloud, Barrett, Tifa, like the OG main trio, right? And the one I used a lot was for Barrett and Cloud, where they get the extra ATB bar. Where I use Barrett a lot in fights, and I use the shit out of Maximum Fury, where you consume all of your ATB gauge, and he does like a continuous like shooting at the enemy, and the more ATB you use, the longer he shoots. So having that extra gauge makes him do Maximum Fury even longer, thus doing more damage. I ain't pretending like it's the most optimal strategy or anything like that, but it's just kind of fun to do. At this point, we're just a little over an hour into the video, and they're finally sitting down in the chairs for the Q&A section. I'm just like, finally, dude. Been wondering the whole time when they're going to sit down. I know they've been standing at the table the whole time. They need the table. It's got the laptop on it. But still, I'm like, Jesus Christ. They've been standing for more than an hour. All right, so at this point, we are most of the way through the video. We've got to the Q&A section, but the majority of it thus far hasn't either been video-worthy or shit we already talked about the other day. But we did get to the section where Hamaguchi's kind of talking about the Highwind, and there are a couple interesting kind of quotes that we didn't talk about previously.
Okay, so the next question, the Highwind is an important aspect of the original game. Will it provide the same amount of freedom in the next installment?
So I think I spoke about it a little bit in the first answer here, but I definitely see the Highwind as an absolutely essential element for that part of the story for the third game. So it's definitely going to be there in some way and play a major part. So the way I look at it is, in the original Final Fantasy VII, the Highwind was this essential part of the game. It was this way you traveled freely around the whole world. And that was such a core part of the game. I don't think you really have the option of not letting you do that in the final game of the trilogy.
Now, that may not necessarily be like brand new information, but it's definitely not info that people were like tweeting out the other day. That I think it's kind of important to take note of is that according to Hamaguchi, they don't really have the option of the Highwind not being this like ship that you can fly around the entire world. Just have the freedom to explore the entire world, right? So it's good that they obviously know how important the Highwind is, which isn't really a surprise because the attention to detail for the Remake project has been pretty good thus far. But it's a matter of like how it's handled. Like, okay, we have the ability to fly around the entire world. That's pretty cool. How does like a land in it work? That's what we're all kind of worried about and kind of concerned about. Because the Highwind, because it's a modern game, the Highwind's fucking massive, right? It's massive in Rebirth. So there's definitely areas you can land the Highwind in probably all the regions, but you can't land it technically anywhere like you could in the original FF7. Some people have theorized that maybe you don't actually land it and like you just kind of pick a point to like land, but you kind of rappel down on like ropes or something, which I think is a definite possibility. It's actually something they do in the original FF7 when you go to the North Crater, right? Like you come down on like either a rope or like a ladder or something, and you walk down into like the crater or whatever, right? So they could do something like that, and that would allow you to technically land pretty much anywhere.
And as well as traveling around the world in the Highwind, you absolutely will be able to do that. There's another aspect of the gameplay you'll be able to access from the Highwind and do something new and special while you're riding around on it. I really want to tell you guys what it is. I'm sitting here, I'm frustrated. I want to tell you that I really can't tell you now. But please wait, and in all good time, we will reveal exactly what we've got in store for the Highwind.
I feel like the Hamaguchi is at least saying that, you know, he wants to tell us, but he obviously can't. It's very early into the development of, you know, the third game, so they clearly can't tell us really anything. But I am very curious what that new, like, gameplay element's going to be. Kind of just a random idea that I thought of is maybe the Chocobo breeding, assuming that is going to be in the third game, because we did have a Chocobo stable in the original game on the Highwinds. They didn't have, like, a ton of use. You could obviously carry your Chocobo with you to another continent. That's quite useful, but they're obviously leaning more into, like, the Chocobo stuff with this game, but no Chocobo breeding. But if the third game's going to have it, and we're going to have a stable in the Highwind, maybe there's more to it that we can do. I don't know. Another kind of interesting quote in regards to the Highwind is Kitase actually chimes in there towards the end of that, where he says that, you know, he's already blown away by what Hamaguchi did with like the world map for Rebirth, and that what he's already got in store for like the Highwind and the third game will also like kind of exceed your expectations. Kind of like what they said about the third game in general. That's going to like kind of blow away any expectations that you have. He says the same thing will happen for the Highwind, which is pretty exciting.
So, as I mentioned in our presentation just now, I had really excited to see what Mr. Hamaguchi came up with for the world map and how that would be done, and how the world map he created really exceeded my expectations of what it could be. I think I can tell you now, what he's got in store for the Highwind will blow you away. It will beat any expectation you have in your head right now. It could be even better. Wow.
It's also another kind of bold claim just because a lot of us have pretty high expectations. I have faith in them, so we'll see. So here we are getting pretty close to the end of the video here, and the guy in the black shirts that's asking the questions says that, you know, Rebirth is better in every aspect, I'm assuming in comparison to Remake, but also says that, and it has Zack, which I just appreciate, you know, some Zack love here. Hamaguchi doesn't really, like, address that part of it, like the Zack stuff. He just talks about, you know, the kind of the standard shit of wanting to make the second game as good as possible without really looking towards the third game just yet when they're making it.
I mean, Rebirth is better in every aspect, and it has that.
Couldn't agree more, man. But dudes, that is pretty much the video. We went through the whole like hour and like 40-something minute presentation if you don't include the countdown intro. There's a decent amount that we talked about. There's a decent amount we didn't talk about. The best stuff, of course, was the shit we talked about in a previous video. That was pretty much just part 3 related stuff. There's still some interesting bits to talk about, otherwise the video wouldn't be as long as it is. But that'll just about do it for me. I've kept enough of your time. This video took a long time to make. So we're just going to wrap it up. That's the video. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Search in the description below. Follow me through dashingdavidbusiness. That's it.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine, or leave it like Cobain.